gentlemen, heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen delegates, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants. I would first of all like to express a message of solidarity from the Malagasy people with all nations and all those families that have been sorely tested by the COVID-19 pandemic. In these particularly difficult times, we reiterate our support and our encouragement to the Secretary General of our organization, Antonio Guterres, for the leadership that he has demonstrated in steering our organization during the pandemic. For this 76th session of the General Assembly, all nations have come together here in the United Nations to together think about appropriate strategies for addressing the effects of COVID-19. Our goal is to find the ways and means to relaunch the economy after the coronavirus, and the well-being of our populations must be the bedrock of all of our reflections. The theme of our session, Building Resilience Through Hope to Recover from COVID-19, Rebuild Sustainably, Respond to the Needs of the Planet, Respect the Rights of People, and Revitalize the United Nations, encourages us to act together to build the post-crisis world at the multilateral level. In the past 2 years, the entire world has been through a period of profound upheaval, which has weakened our economies, bringing with it considerable social impacts. Waging this war, it's not weapons or bombs falling, but rather an invisible enemy, a virus that spread rapidly from country to country and continent to continent. Many have fallen. 4.5 million people have lost their lives. This is a painful reality and a shocking figure. The impact on the jobs market is terrible. Figures from the International Labour Organization speak for themselves. 255 million people have lost their jobs due to the pandemic. The worst affected countries are those whose economies are chiefly based in the informal sector. This has accentuated poverty and worsened living conditions for populations. Middle classes are disappearing and too many families are sliding into precarity. The world economy today is in a serious recession. Forecasts speak of a drop of 5% of incomes per capita, which will tip millions of people into extreme poverty. Health inequalities around the world have been exacerbated. Faced with this war, we have seen that we are not all equal. And some countries, like Madagascar, have had to demonstrate audacity and ingenuity. We have waited on the intelligence of our scientists and also on our traditional pharmacopoeia. Our homegrown solutions were our best weapon in this fight. Ladies and gentlemen, it's hard to avoid the thought that when we speak about developing countries such as Madagascar, it's always the negative, the grim side of the story that is foregrounded in the international arena. And when we talk about the African continent, we always tend to cast a shadow over reality. It's time for that perception to change. We must stop making use of these prejudices and go beyond received ideas. Analyses published concerning the COVID-19 situation predicted a public health disaster on the African continent, but ultimately Africa and so-called vulnerable countries proved all of those forecasts wrong. These countries, like Madagascar, managed to better deal with the impact of COVID-19 and drew some benefit from it. In order to recover from this shockwave, Madagascar decided to adopt an optimistic attitude. by putting our development vision into practice. And today, we are in the process of writing a history of deep-rooted transformation. COVID-19 has not prevented us from continuing the efforts we had already undertaken to catch up Madagascar's backlog of development. By way of examples, in the area of health infrastructure, our aim is to institute healthcare for all, closer to the populations themselves, by building hospitals and primary healthcare centres in all of the region and districts of Madagascar. We have also just built the largest football stadium in the Indian Ocean, which has just been inaugurated, and we are continuing to build sports infrastructure, including stadiums, gyms, and a national elite sport academy. We are investing in sport because sport unites people and brings people together. We are currently also building a new city, Tanah Masoandro, which will be the window on the Indian Ocean. We are putting in place solutions to modernize public transport networks in the capital through the construction of an urban train network, which is currently underway, and work on a cable car system will also begin this year. We are also building thousands of social housing units for the population. The distribution of plots of land, called green landholding, to support agricultural entrepreneurship, as well as the industrialization of Madagascar through the establishment of sugar plants and cement factories, is also underway. Our goal is to produce locally everything that the people of Madagascar need on a daily basis. On the social front, 2.5 million people, or 500,000 families, have benefited from monetary transfers during the coronavirus. The first factory producing nutritional foods, called NutriSud, to combat infantile malnutrition, will also be opened in a week's time. Madagascar is building. We have a vision, Velirano, or commitment, and a program, and we're moving forward, and the country is entering a new age. We can see this, we can feel it, a new generation of leaders driven by a sense of patriotism, and a pragmatic vision is driving this change. We have no time for skeptics. Rather, we are moving forward with determination with our partners and friendly countries who believe in the emergence of Madagascar. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, while the world was fighting against the COVID-19 pandemic, the climate crisis also struck at full force. Climate disasters followed one after another, with a series of floods and fatal storms in Europe, Africa, North Africa and Southeast Asia, but also forest and bushfires, devastating fires in Latin America, the west coast of America, Australia and on the African continent. Among the tragedies caused by climate change, there's also rising sea levels and the advance of desertification. Madagascar is affected by the consequences of climate change. Waves of drought in the south are recurrent. Water sources are drying up, and all subsistence activities are becoming almost impossible. My compatriots living in the south have paid a heavy price from the climate crisis, a crisis that they did not participate in causing. Today, to save the Malagasy living in this part of the country, we are betting on strategic actions to bring about radical and lasting change, including with the construction of a vast pipeline to provide water to the south region to irrigate land and also to allow the people living there to grow crops and at last to live. A pipeline project this large has never been undertaken. It is a historic challenge in line with the historic commitment of the Malagasy state to find a solution to the situation in the south of the Grande Île. The implementation of this large-scale project will allow for a genuine renaissance in this region in the area of agriculture and animal husbandry to create jobs and promote community resilience. the establishment of basic infrastructure in the areas of healthcare, education, energy and security is already underway, because these are fundamental rights for all human beings. As leaders, it is our duty to protect our populations. Ladies and gentlemen, in the fight against climate change, all of our efforts will be in vain if the implementation of measures and sanctions to combat climate change remains lax. This crisis is forcing us to engage in a paradigm shift, because if we do not act, the crisis will continue and get worse. Madagascar therefore calls upon each state to act in an equitable fashion and commensurate with their polluting activities. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the cornerstones of robust emergence are sovereignty and national unity. Among the major issues for Madagascar in this area, there is the question of the Îles Éparses, or Nossi Malagasy. This is a painful wound for in the heart of my country and for my people. Commitments for the decolonization of Madagascar were made by France in 1945 in San Francisco. The return of independence was only achieved in 1960, 15 years later. That decolonization, however, has still not been fully completed, because the issue of the Îles Éparses has still not been solved, despite 2 General Assembly resolutions. The first, in 1979, called upon France to immediately initiate negotiations with Madagascar for the reintegration of the islands, which were arbitrarily separated from Madagascar. Then, in 1980, the United Nations General Assembly expressed its regret that the negotiations called for in Resolution 34/91 had not been initiated, and called for that to be done so urgently. Today, in 2021, 42 years later, United Nations resolutions 42 years after those United Nations resolutions, with my French counterpart, President Emmanuel Macron, we are working together as part of a mixed commission between our 2 countries. And I have every faith in a positive, just and peaceful outcome to this work. I invite our organization, the United Nations, to play its role in ensuring that this happens in a beneficial and coherent way. Madagascar has neither the power nor the arms, and certainly not the pretension to wish to declare war. We have faith in the legitimacy of our aspirations and in our right to decide the destiny of our territory. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for us to put our money where our mouth is when it comes to solidarity, which is the foundation of our organization. We need to prioritize the most vulnerable populations to ensure that our work for them is more effective, for their well-being and for their fulfillment. Today, I am advocating and speaking for them. Our discussions and our reflections are vital and essential because we must work together. We must demonstrate responsible leadership, promoting the cooperation which is the driver of our organizations and our institutions, such as the World Bank and the IMF. These are organizations that support us and accompany us in overcoming this difficult economic period, but also in the implementation of our projects and ambitions for growth, development and emergence. I would also like to thank the International Monetary Fund, which responded to the call from countries with weaker economies to provide the necessary assistance to mitigate fallout from the pandemic. The disbursement of financing was facilitated, and Madagascar benefited from that financing. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, let us strengthen the role of the United Nations, its authority, its effectiveness and its efficiency, based on the progress that has already been achieved. Let us commit to what unites us and what brings us together, rather than what divides or separates us. And it's now in circumstances such as these that we need mutual assistance and the cohesion which is the cement that holds our organization together. The United Nations forms a single whole that unites countries in a harmonious world. And so it's here today that I call upon human solidarity, the unity of nations, and a common hope for our world. May God guide and accompany us. May our homeland be blessed. Thank you for your attention.